Welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for September 27th. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Commissioner Bandel.
Here.
Commissioner Rizzo.
Here.
Commissioner Chase.
Here.
Commissioner Bundy.
Here.
And Commissioner Kenny.
Here.
And join me in a salute to the flag, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so at this point in every meeting, we open it to a public comment for that which is not on tonight's agenda. So if you're online and you would like to raise your hand and make a comment, please do so. I see one Corte Madera resident online, but that hand is not being raised.
No emails either.
Okay.
Chase. Thank you.
So with that said, we're going to close the public comment section of tonight's agenda. And we're going to move to continuing our discussion of the design review discussion that we initiated last time we were all together. And we ended that meeting because we wanted to go home. So I'm going to let staff pick up right where they left off before and take this away. So who's going to introduce this item again and run with it?
I can start us off. So we discussed several different topics at the last meeting, as he said, Chair Chase, and we left off at discussing elevated decks, patios, and yards. And if you're following along on the staff report, that's roughly the middle of page 11 of the staff report. In the middle of that, sorry, the bottom of that page includes the code section that we're talking about. It's section 18-24050 called exceptions to yard requirements. And this section allows property owners to construct certain features within required setbacks, such as decks and patios and built up yards using retaining walls. And over the years, we found this section of code really difficult to administer and at times confusing. So just to sort of start off here, what we're showing on this slide is an example of a deck that's more than 3 feet in height, but less than 15 feet in height. And so that doesn't currently require design review approval. If it was equal to or greater than 15 feet in height, it would be captured with existing design review regulations that require design review for something that's 15 feet in height or more. So again, between 3 and 15 feet does not need design review. And we've sort of controlled these types of applications through our lot coverage standards, because this counts, this deck like this counts towards lot coverage, and we have lot coverage maximums that will help control it. And additionally, our setback regulations would control this deck. A deck like this can project into a rear yard and a side yard. It can project into the rear or front yard by 6 feet, and into a side yard by 3 feet, as long as 3 feet is left at the property line. So those lot coverage and these setbacks have helped us to control the impact of these decks. You know, we'd like your feedback on whether or not we want to require design review for something like this. Again, just to repeat, we talked about, or we will talk about decks that are 3 feet and less in height. This is just a deck like the example here, between 3 and 15. And Phil and I kind of came up with a sample of what this regulation might look like to require design review. For this type of a structure, a patio or raised yard that's more than 3 feet in height, measured from grade to surface level, that's more than 250 square feet, requires design review. And if that deck, no matter what the size, that double I at the bottom, no matter what the size, if it's over 10 feet, it needs design review.
To the deck, not to the railing.
Over 10 feet.
To the surface level, they're
Microphones, please.
from over 10 feet, from measured from grade to surface level of the deck. Or if it's a built up yard using retaining walls from the bottom of the wall to finished grade at the top.
Just, yeah, when just overall, when we talk about decks, we're just talking about the surface area of the deck. We're not concerned with the railing.
That's the image showed 14 feet to the top of the railing. So
Yeah, we're just doing that to provide that information for you, but I mean, I guess the only other example would be a roof deck. So if somebody puts a roof deck on top of their house and that railing extends to be 32 feet, we're going to say that's too tall because the house can only be 30 feet. So in that situation, if the railing is the highest thing on the structure, then we're gonna judge the height by that railing. But in this case, we're only talking about the surface area of the deck because we just think it'd be easier. If you talked about the railing with this, and I guess more importantly too, when someone is standing on this deck, you know, where they're standing is going to determine whether they're impacting your privacy. The railing, you know, isn't really a factor. So that's.
well, would you think the intention of the side setback? I have it.
Yeah.
I got it this time. The 3 feet encroachment into the side yard setback, as long as there's 3 feet left over, was really intended maybe for the stair or the egress and maybe not the deck itself. Because it seems to me that would require a design review if it wasn't within the parameters of the setbacks. Just in general, as a privacy note.
It includes that if you read the first paragraph, page 11 of the staff report, it includes fire escapes, outside stairways, so an unenclosed stairways, eaves, uncovered balconies, decks, porches, and a few other things. But I think one would, with a strict read of this, the authors of this section of code intended a deck to be able to encroach into the side yard that 3 feet.
Okay, I'm just curious because to me, it seems like it'd be an infringement on privacy if it was that close. And
Yeah,
I've done stuff where we hadn't had that leeway and they did allow for the staircase. That's why I was asking because sometimes that's the only place you could put a stair down, or it's coming out of a house and coming down to a staircase for an egress situation.
and maybe given that we allow it to encroach is a good reason to actually require design review for it. Because then you can evaluate whether there are reasons through the design review process to adjust that, maybe to address any privacy impacts. Because right now we don't have the control over that, the privacy impact. We just have control using quantifiable parameters such as how far does it encroach, how tall is it, does it require design review, and does it meet our lot coverage standards?
At the front and the back, to me, encroachment isn't as imperative as the side, just because you usually have more than 20 feet in the back and 20 feet in the front minimum.
Yep.
Usually, unless you're on Christmas Tree Hill.
Yeah. So what you're talking about for a deck in the rear yard, given there's a 25-foot setback and your deck can encroach 6 into that.
Yeah.
You still got 19 feet,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
That's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yep.
I don't know.
And I guess, yeah, maybe going back to this slide in particular, and correct me if I'm wrong, can't remember our discussion, Tracy, but even though we're bringing this up, decks between 3 and 15, in my experience, they really haven't been a problem. So, you know, it's one of those cases like here's a loophole, shall we say, in the code between 3 and 15. But in my 6 years and various, I can't think of one of these, like, oh gosh, that neighbor just built a 14-foot deck, and the person just built a 14-foot deck, and it's making the neighbor's life miserable.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do about it because our code doesn't cover it. That's never happened to me.
Yes,
Um,
same experience. This
so-
doesn't come up a lot.
Maybe it's a solution for a problem that doesn't exist, I guess is my point. Perhaps.
On Grove Street, there was that derelict house that managed to get built with a deck facing the house on Montecito, the back of the house. And they were quite concerned at the time that that was going to infringe on them. But I never heard anything about it, but it was a deck that went off the back. And the resident of Montecito voiced a concern about it. Nothing ever took place out of that. But I can see where back-to-back yards, step like that, deck coming out to the setback, you know, and it looks down on a yard. I think there's reason for that. Anyway, I'll let the other commissioners chime in here. Daniel.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that question, whether this has been an issue, or how often this comes up as an issue. That's the first one. And then the language here, if Phil, as you're saying that it hasn't really been an issue, is staff actually proposing this language or just putting it on the table in case the commission wanted to go in that direction?
I think with all of these, this is a discussion. We're at a discussion point. And so Tracy and I crafted that language. We're not necessarily strongly advocating for it one way or another. It's a part of the discussion. Certainly other language that we've proposed, we're going to advocate stronger for because, it's causing us problems, but this isn't something that's causing us problems.
So also, if we did adopt it, the wording under I, I find the 250 square feet in area, if we really want to review anything over 3 feet, I find the 250 square feet as being too high. That's 10 feet by 25 feet. And so, if it's going to be an issue, that's big enough to be an issue. So, I would just say either has to be should be a smaller number, or just delete it completely and just said, we're still going to review everything over 3 feet.
And
So go ahead.
I was going to sort of provided more information for the first part of your question, which is how often is this an issue? And I think that we do plenty of design reviews for decks that are 15 feet in height or more on Fairview, up on Christmas Tree Hill, and places that are in hills. And that's partly where we're going with the 10 feet in height threshold, is that would probably capture flat areas of town or flatter that are second story decks. And to review those. And I think between 3 and 10 is really, we're not seeing a whole lot of those or issues with any of those.
Could you repeat that?
The
Between 3 and 10, I didn't.
we're not seeing a whole lot of issues with applicants who have decks between 3 and 10 feet. And the reason for the 10-foot mark is because that would capture somebody who wants to build a second story deck, whether it's flat or sloped. Most of the decks that we're doing design review for are because they're over 15 and they're in heavily sloped areas. They're almost always over 15 when it's real steep.
So if the commission did want to change it, we might just change the height, leave everything else the same and just change the height of any deck over 10 feet. Would that also sort of address the issue?
I think it would address kind of what we're worried might happen. But maybe they just have a comment.
So instead of capturing between 3 and 15, we want to capture between 10 and 15. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, suggesting that would require a design review for somebody who wants to build a deck off their second story. That's only 10 feet, 10, 14 feet in height like this. That's a deck off. Sure, it's a lower first story, but that's a deck off a second story. And if it was 14 feet in height, this deck wouldn't need design review. But if we change that for decks that are 10 feet, measured from finished grade to surface level,
Right.
being a threshold for design review, it would capture that. And we're not seeing that, but we certainly could.
I think if I could just address your comment, Dan, earlier, I think if we got rid of the 250 or cut it way down, if somebody wants to put a Juliet balcony, a little step out balcony as big as this table, off their second floor, sliding glass master bedroom, a deck as big as this table that's 10 feet in height, let's say, that seems like too onerous in my view.
Well,
I don't know if 250 is the right number, but
I mean,
0 seems too
100 would
low.
be a
or
10
10.
by 10 deck. That's a good sized deck. I mean,
Uh-huh,
depending on what neighborhood you're in.
sure. Yeah,
I guess I would just argue that if that's our objective, that 250 is too high a number.
uh-huh.
And also too, one more thing to add is in the floodplain, if as more houses are elevated, then adding a deck off, the back of a house, that could potentially also require design review. If it's, if we go with a too low of a threshold for the between 3 feet and 10 feet.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I got another question.
Sure, go ahead.
Does this are we talking about a minor design review? That's done by staff, or are we talking, this isn't something that's a major design review that would come to us?
I think in most cases it would be minor design review.
I
That's
guess
what
I,
we're doing for most of the decks. We are doing design review for.
So if we lower this threshold, we're asking for more review and more. Okay. Because I could already see, if you have something sloping away from a house and it's a deck that's even 4 or 5 feet, it's going to come back to you unless you've got a slope of a backyard that's really, really, really flat. In most cases, this will come to a design review. That's the intention.
I have some real concerns about privacy issues. And even though you said it's only come up a couple times, people are putting bigger and more decks on their home to expand living space. And building underneath it too, just like the example here. And if you just do a quick, I don't know how I really would came to a vote. I don't know how I'd vote on this, but it just seems to me that that you get into privacy, you get into noise, you get, especially on a slope. If the people on top of me, my steep hill, built something and were within it, they'd be raining down on me. I guess I have that concern. I have a question too. If somebody is going to replace their deck with whatever is there now, which could be bigger, or do they have to go through some kind of review? Or just a deck replacement?
If there were a building permit, but if they were to be enlarging it or shifting its location,
Or what?
shifting its
Shifting,
location on the site, then yeah, we maybe would need to do a design review for that. And we have in the past for sort of smaller enlargements that are, way up in the air.
And then here's another question. For instance, off my master bedroom, I have what you'd call a deck. It's only about 3 feet wide and runs the length of the house. Is that considered a deck or a Juliet balcony?
That you can access, you can open a door and you can walk.
I can
Along it.
walk. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'd call that a deck. A Juliet balcony is a tiny little thing, probably from France, where, Juliet would walk out there and say whatever she said, just a tiny little thing. So I think what you're describing, we'd call that a deck.
Even if I have a granddaughter named Juliet.
But I would, and maybe further answer your question, Margaret, about existing decks. So basically, if someone has a deck and they want to improve it, it's all rotted out. First thing we do is we check, is it legal? You know, was it legally constructed? And if it's legally constructed and maybe it's legally constructed, however, it doesn't meet the current code.
No.
Back then, there was no setback. Now there's a 5-foot setback. It's considered existing non-conforming. That's what we call it. And so we say, you've got a 10-foot, a 10 by 10 deck that's existing non-conforming, and you're going to replace the redwood with new redwood. You're not making it any bigger. We let you do that, and you don't have to go through a planning entitlement. You still have to get a building permit, but you don't have to go through a planning process.
And what happens if they want to build a staircase onto it like this one?
If they're building that staircase and it meets the code in terms of setbacks, and they're putting it, you know, on that side instead of on the outside, then
No, it's never been there before. It's a new staircase.
right. If it's a new staircase that complies with the code in terms of setbacks and everything else, then we say yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Dr. Bundy.
Yeah, one thing to consider is some of the homes that are in the floodplain that may be putting on second stories. So depending on whether it's Marin Estates or Madera Gardens or Mariner Cove, the new threshold for the second floor could be, you know, above 10 feet to the grade. So, you know, perhaps that should be factored into it. What I'm hearing is that it really hasn't been a problem. And so if something isn't a problem, I would certainly want to leave it alone and not require more strict oversight. However, is it possible to have the code worded that you need sign off from your immediate neighbors that would be impacted by that? And if anybody had objections, that would require design review. Is that something that is possible?
Who's going to tackle that?
I think
We
that's a good
do
idea.
that with fences. You probably know that fences over 6 feet and up to 8 feet require, and a side or rear require design review approval or written permission from the adjoining neighbor. Our ADU ordinance also includes design review for a non-clear story window on a shared property line or written permission from the neighbor. So we do have a couple sections of code where we include that type of language.
Sounds good.
Historically, that would be a challenge to get into
I
the.
think so too.
Yeah, it's worked back to last meeting, our hot tub. Prior to the hot tub, we were talking about their fence. And so they constructed a 7-foot fence, and they had two options: get approval from the neighbor on your 7-foot fence and you're good to go. You can't get approval from the neighbor, go to the planning, you know, in that case, we came to the planning commission and you all decided it. So there's some, it does, you know, in a case like this, we didn't change this code at all. And someone came in with this deck and we required this person to get sign off from neighbor on left and neighbor on right and perhaps neighbor in the back, if that's an issue. And they got a yes, you know, that would clearly be beneficial to them. They wouldn't have to pay the fee for design review. They wouldn't have to go through the time. So that is a, you know, I don't think we have, well, besides those two cases that Tracy mentioned for ADUs and the fence, those are the only two sections I believe we have that say you can avoid design review if you get neighborhood sign off. We could expand that, as I think Commissioner Bundy is.
Jim, you have a thought?
Well, I mean, if it's within our setbacks and it's within the regulations and it's lower than the 15-foot threshold that we've been talking about for these single stories, and why would we make it harder? More, It sounds like, I understand where Commissioner Bundy's coming from, but it's hard enough to get one neighbor or two neighbors to sign off on something, let alone get all four of them in some cases, all the adjacent neighbors to sign off on it. You need to stick with the square footage, whatever, it's 250, 200, or whatever is comfortable that fits within the regulations with setbacks, or if you're gonna encroach 6 feet. Like I think the 3 foot thing is a little wanky because I do think that gets really close to a property line and you can look right down on someone, but if you left at the stairs, I'd stand behind that one.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to deal with Margaret's concerns about privacy issues. And the fact that it really hasn't come up means that most people would be able to get their immediate neighbors, each side and behind them, to sign off on that. Neighbors would know what's going on, and it then would be smooth sailing. They wouldn't have to go through design review. So I see it as what I would think would be a relatively simple process for doing that. But getting to Margaret's issue about privacy would ensure that the neighbors were informed, aware, and didn't feel it was going to be a privacy issue.
Well, I'm thinking about my specific neighbors right off the bat. And if they put a deck that was 10 feet in height and even 150 square feet, I would be upset. Because it would be looking right down into our yard and our living space and all of that. So, I mean, it's a perfect example of a 5-foot setback, 5-foot setback. They could put a deck on the side of their house if they wanted to, and that would be a problem. And people above them, if they did the same thing, that's a problem. So on our street, those lots are cheek by jowl right there with 5 foot on each side. People are all facing north because they're like 40-foot lots. So some 30, 40-foot lots, something like that. And that would be a problem. I'm thinking, did you guys get a chance to look at any other communities to see if this is in there?
No, but we can do that.
Yeah. I'm just curious, but so my feeling would be that if it either, I would say design review for this as a minor design review would be important. That's my feeling.
Here, can I ask,
Yeah.
in your case, would the height of the deck that somebody might add impact how much it would impact you?
Yes, it does. And for our house, anything that would be over 6 foot would be impactful. And properties above that, because they stair step up the hill, it wouldn't take much to be a problem for adjacent property.
When there's a minor design review, what recourse does a neighbor have if there's a problem?
You can still exercise appeal rights when there's a decision made by the zoning administrator, that's staff. It includes the same provisions for appeal, and the appeal will go to the planning commission. And from there, it could be appealed again, just like any other item that you hear here at the commission to the
How
town
much
council.
is that appeal?
That's the same price as any other appeal. It's $300.
And then when staff is evaluating the design review, they're looking at the same finding. So there's a finding about privacy.
And there's also, if we do a staff level design review and a neighbor has a significant problem with it, we send out the notice and the neighbor calls us up and we talk it all through, and often we have a discussion with the neighbor and the applicant, and we try to work it out basically. And if we're not able to work it out, then we sit down, and Adam has made the call in the past. We sit down and decide, do we want to approve this and have the neighbor possibly appeal? Or do we want to just kick this up to the planning commission? And so that's a choice that we make. And then it comes to you as, it comes to you not as an appeal, but as a design review. And obviously, you know, there's friction. But so that's how, that's how sometimes they're played out. So it really just depends, depends upon the project.
Dr. Bunny,
So my solution would solve Peter's problem. I think he would have to sign off on it for the neighbors to go forward with this. And that would be, in front of having to do an appeal that you might approve, and then after the fact, they would appeal it. The neighbor would appeal it.
Normally, the neighbor approval sort of provisions in our code work in sort of. Does the applicant, can they obtain written neighbor permission? And if you cannot or don't want to, you apply for design review and go through the design review process. And through that process, like Phil's talking about, when there is a controversy, we try to get the parties together to discuss and find common ground. And I won't repeat what he said, but that's part of the process. So it really is, if you want to have your fence over 6 feet, you provide written permission from the adjoining neighbor to the planning director, or you apply for design review and the applicant can choose either one of those avenues.
Okay.
are we good on this subject?
I have a question.
Yes, Daniel.
Can you explain the wording currently when it's a deck between 3 and 15 feet? And I don't understand the 3 feet. Isn't it really just a deck over 15 feet?
That statement is talking about section 1824.050. There's 2 paragraphs there, and one of them talks about decks that are 3 feet and less in height may occupy any required yard. And we know that our existing design review regulations will require a design review for a deck that's 15 feet in height. So that leaves this gray area. If you have a deck that's over 3, but not more than 15, it doesn't need design review. It has to follow certain different setback regulations, but what do we do with that? Certainly there's a greater impact for a deck that's 10 feet in height versus one that's on grade, or less than 3. And are we worried about that? So that's the reason for that range between 3 and 15, because, and we're going to talk about decks 3 and less next. That I'm not sure that answered your question.
And maybe.
I think this first statement, first bullet would be correct if we had written it. A deck less than 15 feet in height that meets setbacks, lot coverage, does not require design review. So we could have gotten rid of the 3. Right, Tracy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, I mean, if we decide to reword, that would be a little clearer.
Yeah, a deck 15 feet in height or less that meets all the other numbers does not require design review under today's rules. And so, and as an example, this picture we're looking at does not require design review in today's rules.
Daniel, where do you stand after hearing all this with regard to requiring design review?
Well, I could go one of 2 ways. I could keep what we have under the understanding that there's only been, a few cases where this has been an issue. And then why put people through it? Why take staff's time? So that's one option. I think Bob's option also deserves potentially some consideration. It's already a practice we use for other things. And if a neighbor doesn't want to get approval, they could still go through the staff. Although I would say that I feel more comfortable if the 15 feet were 10 feet, not 15, I think. And it's kind of interesting because, that was part of the proposal here, but it just 15 feet is pretty high. And so anyway, those are my considerations.
Okay. Very good. I think I know where you stand, Margaret. But you want to clarify?
Well, I think I agree with Bob's proposal. And I also agree with what Dan just said. I think 10 feet sounds better to me,
Yeah,
given the number of hillsides in our area. I think it's better. And also being sensitive to how many times just the word privacy comes up. Every single time we go through anything we hear here, everybody's bringing up privacy now because people really are living closer together.
Mr. Rizzo. What's your summary?
Wow, I think Dr. Bundy might have sold me. And,
Yeah.
and you're, well, I'm just thinking about someone's fence 12 feet and your situation and someone's looking down at you and your hot tub. Right, and it's like you had the hot tub there for 50 years and now you can't go in it, really. So I think I could stand behind where Dr. Bundy had said, let's get the sign off first, and then it's a no-brainer, and then it might get kicked into a design review. Over 3 feet. After 3 feet, it becomes someone can look over your fence very easily.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think the 10-foot rule is important too, right? 10 foot. You agree with that? 10 foot?
Well, I thought we were talking about over 3 feet, not 10
Yeah,
feet.
no, but
Because at 10 feet, you're talking about no design review up to, if we were strictly talking about this language, then anything 10 feet and 250 square feet is we're talking not getting sign off, or we are talking about getting sign off.
getting signed off, yeah. But, right? 10 feet, yeah. So more than 10 feet in height requires a design review, yeah. But I think that it's a two-part solution, right? That's what I'm hearing. Neighbor sign off, and then we drop that height requirement 10 to 10 foot.
So then for decks between less than 10 feet, there would not be design review? Is that what the,
But neighbor sign off.
But neighbors.
okay, so you always need neighbor sign off
Right.
if it's over 3 feet.
That's what we're saying. Yeah.
So neighborhood sign off, if you're building a deck between 3 and 10. And then if you're building a deck greater than 10 feet,
Gonna see you guys.
Design review.
design review, okay.
Mandatory.
So we've lowered that threshold as well, because it used to be 15. We've just lowered 2. So today you don't have to do anything between 0 and 15. Now you all are proposing neighborhood sign off if you're between 0 and 10,
Or 3.
3 and 10. Okay, 3 and 10, that's because, right. So neighborhood sign off if you're between 3 and 10, and design review if you're 10 and above.
And or above 250 square feet. There's that threshold too there.
Right. And more than 250. But though Dan wanted 250 to be lower. We can go there.
Dr. Bundy, you have that look?
I could be okay with leaving it at 15 feet as long as the neighbors signed off on it. And the experience has been that it really hasn't been that big a problem. Especially thinking about people in the floodplain that are going to raise their house and want to put a deck off the second story.
There's sort of a difference of opinion.
We've got the 10 footers and we got 15 footers.
It might help if we come back with what
Yeah.
other communities are
Line
doing.
between the pylons and
And-
figure out a solution there.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, we have this infamous deck. Not yet. No, we're gonna keep going here. This is a sticky wicket.
Or on decks. So also what this section of code, exceptions to yard requirements, talks about is decks or built-up yards. There's a deck that's 3 feet or less is shown on the slide, probably 1.5, 2 feet in height. And a built-up yard on the right-hand side, a little section of that. The built-up yard being the lower, I have a mouse, but the lower part where you have the wall and then the backfill is the built-up yard where somebody now can view, seat, play, entertain on that raised yard. If those are 3 feet or less in height, our code says they may occupy any required yard. So that image on the left, that deck, where you're positioning somebody looking over the fence, that can be built up right to a property line. Same with the built-up wall shown on the right, can be built right up to a property line. And we just are looking for some feedback. What regulatory mechanism might be appropriate here? And we talked about introducing a setback, a required setback for something like this, a deck on grade or deck 3 feet and less in height. Maybe setting it back 3 feet from a side or 5 from a rear. And that would be consistent with how we treat some other features, some other structures in our code, accessory structures.
Where this has become a problem most recently is a situation where it's similar to this picture, the picture on the left, and the property after you go beyond the fence, the property slopes down quite a bit, and then that's the neighbor's backyard. So neighbor backyard built this deck, and now they can stand on their deck and they can look right down into the backyard of somebody below them. And they've built a 2.5 foot deck. And so now that 6 foot fence that used to protect them now doesn't protect them at all, because a 6 foot, 5 foot tall person can easily see over. So that's a real life scenario that we have currently.
In the last roughly 4 years, we've have 2 instances that we know of where this has become an issue. So it's not a lot, but it's worth discussing whether we should some sort of mechanism to control for the impacts that something like this could potentially have at a shared property line.
And this deck is by right at this point.
Correct.
That's
Right.
Correct.
That picture, yeah.
It does not contribute to lot coverage. And it may, pursuant to the section of code we're talking about, it may occupy any required yard, so long as it's 3 feet in height or less.
Yeah.
So let me see if I understand.
Mhm.
If someone built a deck not attached to the house that was 14.5 feet tall, they could also look into the neighbor's yard, right?
Sure. Yeah, and they would.
So we
They
just,
couldn't go right up to the property line with that
no,
14.
there'd have to be a setback. But if it was 14.5 feet and tall, it wouldn't have to go up to the property line. I'm just saying, relative to what we just discussed in privacy,
Uh-huh.
a deck could potentially be worse than this situation. So I think when we come back and visit that, it's just a thought.
Yeah. And
I'm seeing that Mr. Wolf raised his hand.
Adam, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm here. Can I pull the, I didn't mean to raise my hand comment from the public. No. I'm sorry to jump in. I think you guys are having a great conversation. I did just want to add one thing that the example that we've seen, there is the ability for the fence, while by right is 6 feet, it could go up to 8 feet. But what we've heard is that the other neighbor may not want an 8-foot fence because it's actually visually too large from a downhill perspective, and that has come up as an issue. And I think, just to respond to Commissioner Kenny's point, I thought we had discussed that if you went to above the 3 feet and we changed the rules, you would be into a design review. Well, at 14.5 feet, would you not be into the design review conversation?
Yeah, I don't think we've come to that conclusion as a commission, but that's so I just bring it up as a discussion point.
I
We
see.
can go back to that at some other meeting.
Right, when we take a look at what other
Right.
jurisdictions have solved this problem for us, or how they've addressed it. Mhm.
And one thing, just on just to go back on the railings, I don't know if this makes it more confusing, but currently we are interpreting if the matter of if the railings themselves extend up beyond 15 feet, then that would trigger the design review as well. So a 14.5 foot deck would necessarily have railings that would increase its height over 15 feet. But we certainly would spell that out in any design review change to the ordinance.
Okay, so Adam, anything else?
No,
Not right now?
not now. No,
Okay,
you guys are doing great.
you keep your mic open, right? So on this subject, what I would like to do is hear from the commissioners and then see if either of the other two people online have any comment to share with these two elements that we've brought up so far. So the choice here, as I see it, is really whether to require a setback for these decks, right? That you're proposing as an option for this, and what that setback might be. When the fence is placed on top of a retaining wall and a setback to a deck, right? Is that
Right, and I think what we're really talking about is on a setback on a shared property line. We are sometimes seeing in particular walls in front yards that are built up, but they're used to provide access up to an upsloping entryway. And so given that creating this built up yard in your front yard wouldn't have privacy impacts because you're facing the public street, what we're talking about is required setback potentially for shared property lines.
okay? So are you guys clear on what this option is before us here to talk about? So Margaret, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that I would be in favor of a setback
Mhm.
on a shared property line.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I feel strongly about that.
likewise, yeah, and they're a minimum of 18 inches. Would you opt for more?
I would say 3 feet.
Setback for the deck,
Mhm.
or setback for the deck, or setback for the retaining, for the fence.
From the shared property line.
It would be too much to move the fence back from the property line, but
Yeah.
the deck could
The
be
deck.
3 feet back. Yeah.
So in that,
The edge of the deck.
so if I could just show on this, so. So, in this situation, let's assume this is a shared property line.
Mhm.
There's a neighbor right there. Currently, this picture shows, let's just say this is 2 feet.
Shows what?
Let's just say this is 2 feet.
Oh, 2 feet, yeah.
The distance between the edge of the deck and the fence / property line. So obviously, if someone walks up here and they're 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall, they can see right over.
Mhm.
If you take this and bring it back 5 feet, it's more difficult for them to look over the greater distance. It also, yeah.
And what happens? And that looks like it's not straight. It looks like it's on a slant. Is that parallel to the fence? Or is that perspective that I'm looking at?
I think in this case, yeah, the deck is parallel to the fence.
And what happens if a design comes in where, and these pie-shaped lots that we're seeing, it might be that it was not parallel to the fence. Would it be the furthest, the corner that would be closest to the property line?
Be the
That-
entire
that you
deck would
would-
need to meet that setback,
Yeah.
whatever shape it is. So if you have one corner that's closer, that's got to be 5, and then the corner that's further is further.
I get it. And if it was a really odd shaped line, they could always ask for a variance.
Jim,
Well, I'm kind of looking at this like I would look at a fence right in a property line that's on a slope. I almost treat it like our last item where you get the neighbor to sign off on something that goes up to 8 feet. Because there could be an opportunity just to build right to the property line, as long as there was a privacy thing. But also, if you didn't get neighborhood approval, perhaps you treat it like the next item where we're talking about creating a setback from the retaining wall on the other side. And you could still build up to the fence, because you can have a 6-foot fence with a setback from the retaining wall, creating some sort of relief, but it would be on your property. Just like we're going to talk about next with the fence. Does everybody follow me? Like from that retaining wall on the right, if you want to build all the way up to your property line, you have to be set back if you want to build a fence that's more than 6 feet. You have to provide a fence that's 6 feet regardless if you're going to build to the property line, but be set back from the property line. Am I making any sense? Because in our next item, we're talking about with a fence, if you're going to build a fence over 6 feet, we're going to want you to set it back and have a planting area to have relief, so you get your light coming down your property. You're not like in a well, but I would treat this almost the same way, because I think if you've got a sloped lot, and let's just say you're terracing your lot, your fence is at some point your fence could be over 6, it could start at 5 feet and end at 8 feet, or, how do we define that?
Didn't that come up last week? Or
Well, we
the week
define it, that we define height by the parallel to the grade.
Yeah, but on the other side, like, so you have one neighbor that's terracing their lot and one that's keeping a slope. On the person who's getting impacted, the fence is going from 6 feet to 8 feet, from 6 feet to 8 feet, or it's going from 8 feet to 5 feet on a sloped lot. So what I'm saying is, I think it should be the same sort of thing as what Dr. Bundy had mentioned was, let's get sign off on a fence that is anything over 6 feet on the neighborhood, or you put the onus on the person who's trying to terrace or trying to build this deck all the way to the property line and make them set it back into their property and create some sort of relief for the neighbor who's in a tunnel.
Right. So it sounds like we have maybe two ways to solve this problem in the picture. Margaret is suggest, or one suggestion is create a 5-foot setback. Another suggestion is, which we do allow today, is allow that person to build an 8-foot fence if the other neighbor says yes. So those are two solutions. We can also combine both of those and say you have to do 5 feet and you have to do an 8-foot fence, or 8-foot fence and 3 feet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think my third thing was to actually move the fence. There could be a parameter where, let's just say you are building a fence, you're building a retaining wall and you're building a fence, just similar to the next. Can you put the next image up?
Sure.
That.
Right.
And that's it. So, I mean, I think what we're going to be talking about next is actually creating some sort of step in that fence. So I'm
Right.
saying if someone really wanted to build all the way as close as they could to the property line, could there be another provision where they could go up to 3 feet or 18 inches of the property line, as long as they stepped it back. So I want whatever we come up with the next one with the fence,
Right.
it almost ties in with what we're gonna be doing with the 3-foot setback, because if you set your fence back, you might be able to build closer to the property line. If you set your fence back from the neighbor.
See, I kind of, I'm visualizing this as different. I'm visualizing the previous slide. Previous slide, we're trying to solve the problem of a 6 foot tall person standing on that deck and looking down at the neighbors. And so that's the problem with that slide. And then the next one is the photographer and whoever else is walking by and they have to look at this monstrous 10-foot tall thing. And so this 10-foot tall thing can be softened by saying 4-foot tall retaining wall, 18 inches of landscaping, and then 6-foot tall fence. And then you're not looking at this monstrosity, you're looking at wood, green wood. But I'm not sure how you're connecting the two.
So let's just say you were to build all the way to the property line and you wanted a 6-foot fence, but now you're 8 or 10 feet above the neighbor,
Below you.
right? Because you're now 9 feet above, right?
Right.
But what I'm saying is if you were to take that same terminology and move that fence back, it would create privacy for you, which is a 6-foot fence, and for the neighbor, it would give them the relief on the fence on their side, similar to what we're going to be talking about next. So it would allow you to have that 3 foot almost all the way to the property line in align with the fence ordinance we're going to look at. Does that make any sense to any of the other commissioners or not? No?
I think, Commissioner, if I may, sorry, I'm chiming in here from afar. I think Commissioner Rizzo, I think maybe one of the, and I've thought about this too, what you're saying is almost you would require a 6-foot fence to be built on top of the elevated platform or whatnot. So
Yeah,
that
but we
it's
need to-
actually the privacy moves along with the deck.
Correct.
That's an option we, thought about, but
If it was closer to the property line, I guess.
right, if it's within a
Trying to
certain,
get as close to the property line as possible, then privacy moves with deck. But if the neighbor is not happy with the fact that it is right on the property line and they're in kind of a 9-foot tall wall, then, the requirement would be to set it back as we would any other fence that's taller than 6 feet.
Not to put you on the spot, but would you like to draw that for us? Not up there, just on a piece of paper, and then we can look at it.
This. So,
No,
this guy,
I get it now.
if you build it here, this person's super impacted,
Sure.
right? But if you require the fence to be here, and you're not impacting as much on this neighbor, but it's creating privacy, but it's also giving this neighbor some relief. And that's what we're gonna be talking about next with regular fences. So in essence, someone could actually build a 6-foot fence here for what we're gonna talk about next, and then build a deck to it.
Right.
So you're building a deck with a wall, basically.
With a- Yeah, 6-foot
Yeah.
fence, right? Instead of a 3-foot railing, it's a 6-foot
Fence.
fence, right?
Wall.
Yeah, right,
Okay, that's.
okay.
We have kind of talked about this internally a little bit. Whether we should require on a shared property line, the fence to be set back, like you said, some distance to provide relief. And it kind of begs the question then, how does that property owner maintain that landscaped area? And, think of, for example, on Granada Drive, those lots go downhill and there's a retaining wall between each of them. And it seems that at least from what we've looked at and trying to test this out in different areas of town, that primarily we're seeing the retaining wall being in place to benefit the downslope neighbor. So they have a side yard and then there's a slope. And then at least on Granada, in my example, that fence is already setback because the property lines were adjusted for that. So the wall was, we're using the setback for the wall from the property line to create a condition that the fence is then on the property line. So the person downhill benefiting from the wall in some cases, they're required to set the wall back from the property line. So you have the same effect, but the wall is in the Granada Drive example, the wall is on the downslope neighbor's property. It's their wall. And the fence is a shared fence. It happens to be on the property line, a little bit upslope from the wall. We may not see that condition always because we're talking about a built up yard, and the person building up the yard is obviously the upslope neighbor. They're benefiting from it. And maybe we'd see that on a site that has a lot of new site work doing that. But in sort of testing this out, we've observed that the fence and wall combination has, except for when it's on fronting the public right of way in our next example, we haven't been seeing problems with that. Where we are seeing them is when that wall and fence combination is on a street side of a lot facing the right of way. And it makes it a little easier to tell that property owner, you must set your fence in because they can still access that 18-inch landscaped area to maintain it for the life of that fence and wall combination. That makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's not really the landscaping. It's more about letting the light in there. Right. I think that's my point. It's more about the light. Let's face it. I mean, if someone's house is all fenced off, nobody's going to go in someone else's property to maintain plants that are on their property, but really access through the neighbor's yard. The downhill neighbor is going to benefit from more light and space.
I'm going to come out with some sentiments in a moment, but Bob.
I think we have to view these two examples as two different types of issue. I think in the basis of the grading and the retaining wall, I like Jim's suggestion that the fence be set back, and it would be up to the adjoining neighbor if they want to put some planting in there. You know, it's not because as Jim points out, the neighbor that is expanding his lot or expanding his useful lot doesn't have access to that. So it'd really be, up to the neighbor as to how they wanted to use that. From the standpoint of the deck, 3 feet or less, privacy issues could be an impact. Somebody could put a raised deck on the newly graded and retaining wall, and they would be up high. I think what we should do is just keep the deck 3 feet or less within the setbacks. The same as we would for the one up to 10 feet. That would be my recommendation to assure privacy, because if we allowed a deck to go within 5 feet, 3 feet of a 6-foot fence, they're still going to be looking over, into the neighbor's backyard. So I think keeping it within the setbacks would be the best solution for the neighbors in particular and the privacy issues that have been addressed.
Thank you, Bob. Daniel, do you have any further thoughts?
I also think that the built deck and the graded patio are somewhat different situations. Because if you had a larger setback from the retaining wall, then you end up with this piece of land that's not usable by anybody. And I am concerned about the maintenance issue. I understand there could be a benefit to the downside neighbor. But it's a neighbor then is gardening somebody else's property, so there could be future issues about, well, we decided we don't like what you planted, so you can't now plant anything there. You know, we're separating the fence from the property line, so
Mhm.
I think we got to think about how that area is going to get maintained, and it's a nice idea. I mean, you get more land to garden, but I think there could be problems because you're really gardening somebody else's property.
Yeah, for my part, I would agree with that. And I think that, let's take it back to the libertarian viewpoint. My property is my property. I want all of my property, and I should be able to build whatever I want to on my property, and then right up to the property line. Right? Okay, within the limitations of the code. So, and I feel that way myself, given that part of my property is enjoyed by somebody else. And I would rather be enjoying all of my property than have given it up to someone else. There's a fence there. So the other side of that coin is that in many communities, you can only build a 6-foot fence on either side of that fence. You can't go above 6 foot on the downhill side.
Mhm.
You know, it is 6 foot, period. And you don't get to, so if that means that it's 5 foot on the uphill side then it's 5 foot. That's what it is, so that that fence doesn't become a wall. And that's certainly the rule in a number of communities,
Mhm.
that you can't go above that line, period. Both neighbors have to abide by the 6-foot rule. So,
Right.
you know, that's one way of looking at it. And then to set a deck back is the appropriate thing from that. And that's a requirement that says, okay, you don't get to peer down into your neighbor. You do have to stand back 3 feet from the property line, but you do get the full use of your property. I think that that's an appropriate way to look at it. So this photo that is here shows that if that stone wall were, that brick wall were the property line, the fence would be
Mhm.
set back, and that is literally to the enjoyment of someone else.
Right.
So happens that that is accessible. I've certainly seen many communities where there are 2 fences along a property line, and
Mhm.
that space in between looks like hell. You know,
Right.
but because of that, one party wants a fence that looks like some design A, and the other one wants design B.
Mhm.
And they've set back to create these different appearances or deal with the different elevations. And it doesn't seem to me that that benefits the community or either one to that greater effect. They lose part of their property. And that, you look down a lot line, it looks terrible. Can't be maintained at all. So, yeah, my thought is this is fine for street frontage, but on a common property line, no.
So on a, right on a, so yeah, what you're proposing is this situation would be allowed and, or no,
No,
okay,
no. Because it would only be 6 foot.
okay. So for,
Maybe 8 feet,
uh,
if you get neighbor's approval, so that should still
Yeah,
stay,
this is
correct?
this is really
That's 10, right?
really almost a front yard or something.
Oh, no, I'm just.
Yeah.
It's a 3-foot wall and a 6-foot fence. And there is a section of code it's in our staff report. I can bring it up on the screen that says that when you're measuring a fence, you measure from the height of the fence from the high side. And we'll talk about that next, but that's part of why this is problematic, because the way you measure a fence, and I think we used to measure it differently. And I think maybe where that came from is on a sloped lot. If you measure from the low side, your fence does this, and you have deer that can jump over and can't jump out. So we thought, well, we need to do this then for those people on sloped lots. And anyways, it complicates this type of issue. But yeah, this is 6-foot fence and a 3-foot wall on a street side property line. the fence would need to be 4 feet if it got any closer to the front yard, because it would be within the front yard setback. And additionally, when it's within 50 feet of the intersection, it has to be 4 or less. So that's what they've done here.
I'm just kind of going, maybe challenging the libertarian, Mr. Chase. So if an uphill neighbor chose to build this in their backyard, and they've got a sloping backyard like this, and they want to make it level, so now they've got a flatter backyard, and as a result, this is what the downhill neighbor gets to look at.
Right.
What I hear you saying is that's life. And to by mitigating it, as you other folks said, one way to mitigate it is provide that 18-inch buffer for vegetation. But again, you're saying then somebody's planting on somebody else's property.
So a street side required, you could require the setback instead of doing this on a street side. That's what I'm saying. And then on a property line, a joint property line, you'd have to abide by the 6-foot rule, both sides of the fence. So you wouldn't be able to do this on a common line.
So you would measure the fence and retaining wall combined.
Right.
Petaluma does it that way. The maximum height of wall and fence combination. It's 10 feet.
Yeah.
And
You're interested in
then
that.
have the opportunity to ask your neighbor if they would sign off on the 8-foot fence so that you would be able to build a privacy fence. There'd still be an opportunity to build a bigger fence with neighbor's approval, correct?
Yeah.
But couldn't you move the fence 6 inches off of the retaining wall and build a 6-foot high fence? Because it's now measured from grade.
That could potentially be part of a regulation. What is the distance at which you measure the wall and fence in combination? And what is the distance at which you no longer measure them in combination? Is it 18 inches, 3 feet? I don't know, but I do know that there are some jurisdictions that
Skating between the lines, yeah.
But it does address my concern and Peter's concern about giving up land. At least the landowners making that decision to give up the land, right?
Well,
If they- Anyway,
Right.
I think we did need to get back to the privacy issue for the person on the lower lot. Where something is regraded like that. I don't think they would be happy with a 6-foot fence from the new lower level. Because they're going to be seriously impacted. So I would be in favor of doing the 6-foot fence from the higher grade.
Top of a retaining.
Yeah.
So,
I just think maybe there's just more options. You could do a side yard setback. You could build on top of that retaining wall with neighbor approval. You could, but I also agree with Peter about it being at the setback.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that makes sense. There's a reason for the setback being 5 feet, 5 or 6 feet in an R1. Maybe we don't let them encroach unless it's some sort of staircase. So that's my point earlier.
but you're talking about a deck then,
We're talking about, well,
not a patio that's been raised, right?
if the patio was raised, then they would have to do a retaining wall. And if the retaining wall was done in their setback, then it wouldn't require any other approval. But if it was at the property line, then it would come to a design review or a neighborhood agreement. Because it would be more than 6 feet, because then you're creating an issue on the other side.
Peter, could you just go back over that one more time?
So my position is that the net height, the total height of a retaining wall and a the fence could be 6 foot at the property line, but they can apply for a variance, they can go for neighbor permission. They can do all that, but it's measured on both sides of the fence at 6 foot. If it's a front property line or to an open space or anything else, they can set it back by distance, 18 inches, 3 feet, something like that, so that it doesn't appear so high. Then you guys could augment the code by saying, okay, you want to do that, then you get to put in landscaping of a certain size and blah, 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 if you want, you know. You can literally create draft drawings that would show what people can do to increase privacy, right? Greenery is a lot more acceptable than a fence. That's something that could be encouraged. Got some laurels that are 16 foot. People could do that. Not a great thing, but. So this is a thorny issue. I don't think it presents itself with a clear solution. And I think drawing aids would help describe this significantly.
Well, I thought we were getting a general consensus that a raised deck should be within the setback, that was a requirement. And then the issue is the fence and whether should be set back if the lot was regraded. And so that seems to be the more debatable issue that's going on right now. I think that looking at a half fence from the neighbor's lower side, you just realize that you want privacy. This is really a bit of a monolith, but you just do some plantings that grow up on the fence or are in front of the fence. And, that's the best way to deal with it. I think the staff has a lot to chew over in regard to our comments and maybe checking what some other communities are doing.
Would agree.
Okay.
I want to see if the individual who's listed as Corte Madera resident has any commentary that they would like to contribute. They haven't raised a hand, but I'd like to take this opportunity to offer that person to raise their hand. If they did, yes.
Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, there you go. I'm just along for the ride, folks. Don't worry about me.
Well, thanks for coming.
Who would that be?
58-year resident of Corte Madera on East Corte Madera.
Oh, great. Nice to
Yeah.
have you aboard.
Also working on an ADU. So I'm just following along to see if anything falls into that realm.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. Great. We checked in with our public. So, where would you like to take this next, Tracy? Do we turn the page?
Kind of talked about retaining walls and fences.
Yeah, I think we've already talked about this one and the next one. Yeah, I think Tracy and I will just put our heads together and look at some other jurisdictions like we have before and come up with some solutions. But what I think we're hearing in general is that the condition of this condition, if it impacts the lower property owner, as Mr. Bundy was saying, they can add some landscaping and take care of themselves. kind of, or, that's one option as opposed to us requiring the fence and the retaining wall to be offset.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, with that, I think we're jumping ahead to design review findings. So these are all, these are the 9 design review findings. The 9th one was added just last year, dealing with multiple dwelling projects. So in least in my opinion, the gist of the design review findings, when I tell someone that they're going to have to go through design review, I usually, the elevator speech that is that you're going to need to make sure your project does not significantly impact your neighbor's natural light, their view, and their privacy. And then obviously there's these 8 items that go into a little bit more detail. But for me, that's the meat of the meat of the design review findings. And that's usually what we end up debating and discussing at these meetings is natural light, privacy, and view. Jim.
We're not going to go over the side yard slope ordinance that was in the packet.
The side yard,
The slope setback on the side. I thought that was the next one.
which page you on, Jim? Let me see.
I think
That's 17.
17.
there's some figures that are included in our code that are in the wrong place and
Oh, thank you.
aren't helpful or cause confusion. And we will talk about that next. And we've kind of classified those as some errors or modifications to make to correct some errors and typos or omissions, accidental omissions in the code.
Some of the graphics were in the wrong place, it looks like.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, actually, Jim, we're still
It's
on page 16. Design review findings. But our slide doesn't match the staff report. The subject does, but the
Attachment 1 of the findings.
And we don't want to wordsmith this tonight. We just want to hear from the commission. Is there something that it stands out to you as not helpful in your consideration of any application? Is there something that is missing that would be helpful to include? And the next slide shows just an example of one of the findings that staff thinks potentially could be reworded, and what we would do if you think there's any findings that aren't working right or aren't helpful to you. We would go away and study that and look at other jurisdictions and come back with some suggestions for those particular findings. One really easy example is you make the finding for every design review about signs back. And at the bottom, the design and location of signs, and we're making that finding for residential projects. And so maybe we want to clarify, really easy to clarify that that's made for commercial projects only. And then on the slide that I had up a second ago, I'm showing a Larkspur finding that we tracked down that has some good language and maybe is more clear, speaking to what we're trying to say in finding 6, especially the part that we highlighted in red, especially maybe to somebody who's not experienced in looking at sort of this design review findings in general might make more sense than internal sense of order, but changing that to say that design elements combined together to in an attractive and visually cohesive manner might make more sense than just saying the project creates an internal sense of order. That's just an example. I don't think we're going to wordsmith it. I think that if you are happy with all of the findings and don't struggle with any of them in terms of their wording, then maybe we're in a good spot.
and just also to Commissioner Metcalf, and I remember numerous times when the commission was struggling and when she was struggling with projects, there was a sense, I got the sense from her that if we had stronger findings or if we had different findings, there wouldn't be as much of a struggle. We never got, and maybe Peter, you recall, or, I'm not exactly sure what that was, and that's kind of how we're opening this up tonight. Is there, when you think back to a project, if we had a stronger finding, a different finding, that project would have been easier to say yes or no to.
And I think as a rule, we're searching for that stronger language in order to make a better declaration about whether we can make the findings for the project. And this is to your point, and I appreciate how you phrase this. In 6, create an internal sense of order. Now that's a group of words that are found in almost every planning code somewhere, right? Creating an internal sense of order.
Yeah.
It's a little vacuous. And it doesn't really, that's subjective. So maybe it's intended to be subjective, but it's a little too open for interpretation. And I think your point about that inside of these findings is to look for those sort of open statements that aren't definitive enough. I would agree with that. And I think what you've got on the screen is really important to at least provide some basis for further consideration. You can look at that first sentence and read it out there. And you can attach meaning to those words better than you can create an internal sense of order.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I agree 100%, 150%. I think that
151%.
I think that really gives you something to think about. And it also leaves open just the idea, like compatible with and complements doesn't mean stays the same. It just allows, I think it just sounds like would allow better design. And also give the planning commission something to, the language to use that's more helpful. That particular one. There are other problems I see with these.
And I think this one speaks to what one of the members of the audience last meeting, the architect mentioned. Support good design as opposed to fitting into the neighborhood or matching the neighborhood. I think that was
Matching
her point.
rather
Yeah.
If I may, I kind of feel like I've had to address these several times, and I kind of feel like over the years there's been verbiage that have been kind of stuck on some of the findings, and they almost need to be, there could be a few more defined, more focused findings. Like it seems like we're always throwing a grading or a vegetation or something in there, which maybe there should be just a finding on grading and vegetation and drainage, rather than kind of, slapping it in the middle of structures and then landscaping. It just seems like there might be an opportunity to kind of add, have one of the findings really talk about the building envelope, not just the building envelope, how it addresses the community, and then landscaping. Like it seems like there's not it could be a little bit more focused, some of the language and the verbiage. I could go through each one of them, but we'd be here all night. I just think, in general, if you read through it, and maybe separate it, maybe add one or two, or
So maybe
to me, like I see like our big concerns are, the building envelope, the landscaping, the grading, the view, sunlight and privacy. And then there's the signs at the bottom, which really doesn't apply to much of the R1 that that we review on a whole, but and I know you guys want to put this all in kind of one area of the planning code. I could also see this as there's a grouping of findings that kind of adhere to all the building types that we're going to review, commercial, mixed use, and R1. But then there might be when we get to some of the specific plans or zoning, there might be some additional, there could be a line at the bottom. And if you're developing mixed use commercial, look at, 1830, 070 A, B, or C, or whatever. And then that way we're very familiar with how these findings are correlated with our general plan. And then if we're reviewing something in an MX, maybe then it gives us an opportunity, like, let's go look at that. Now we've got some additional findings that are very focused on that building type.
So it sounds like your initial statement was kind of beefing up or maybe separating finding number 2 to really get, pinpoint on landscaping and also pinpoint on grading a little bit more.
Sort of like I see 3 and 6 being very similar.
3 and 6. Okay.
3 and 6 kind of look kind of similar to me, and and maybe could be wordsmithed, and but I do think that I know that we've got concerns on grading and vegetation and also building, but it's sort of like, how do you specifically, there's something in here like, design your landscaping with a sense of order to, fit in with the neighborhood. But landscaping is such a, how do you fit that in with like we're reviewing buildings,
Right.
We're building the envelope and how the building, meets, I should say, marries in with the building fabric, but we're not necessarily designing all Craftsman buildings. We're just telling them the massing needs to feel like it fits in the neighborhood. And then I feel like then we kind of, put vegetation in there, and a lot of these projects don't really have vegetation. So sometimes in that finding, I'll go, and I'm not doing any landscaping. Like, rather than having something on landscaping and grading and addressing that in one paragraph.
I think number 3 has 2 very, very different pieces to it, and that ought to be separated out. I think number 3, we see so frequently the first part of it, and the second part of it, the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. It's just like, and salute the US Constitution.
just tacked on.
Yeah, it just doesn't have any real teeth to it. We, of course, we want everything to be healthy, safety.
Right.
That's what the whole town's about. It's not necessary there.
You could almost stop at residences because, the buffering between residential and non-residential uses is in our code anyway.
Yeah.
You got a 50-foot setback.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's 3 things in that. What's this project going to do to the nearby residences? And then is there a buffer between residential and non-residential? And then the third is, how is this project going to affect the town, the public? And I think we can get rid of the second one. And the first one makes total sense. How's this going to affect the nearby neighbor? And I think the third one makes sense. How is this project going to affect residents in Corte Madera when they drive by? Some projects you don't see at all, but some other projects do. So other projects do affect. They affect all residents who drive by Tamalpais, perhaps, but they don't affect the immediate neighbors. So that's kind of how I see the third part of number 3. It may not be worded great, but that's how I've interpreted it.
Well, I also think in number 3, at some place, I don't know if it is this place, but it comes up so frequently, I think it needs to be better explained, the idea of view, the idea of sunlight, and the idea of privacy. And I don't know if that needs an asterisk, see such and such appendix, or we should say something there.
Yeah, and I've always when I explain those three things to applicants, I often explain to them, the only thing that I'm able to quantify of those three is sunlight. So when you do a shade study, you can give pretty accurate numbers that right now, the project does not shade the neighbor's house backyard at all. When they do their second story addition, it's going to shade 50% of their yard in the spring and 50% in the fall and 20% in winter and summer, whatever it is. So sunlight is quantifiable, and the other two, views and privacy, are, in my opinion, are gray. And I don't know if you can quantify, start out with views, how to, quantify a view would be very difficult.
Well, and Adam's probably gonna raise his hand after this, but I mean, Tim Ron spent a lot of time putting together a pretty big, large part of their code that defines the purpose and the principles of what we're talking about with privacy, sunlight.
Mhm.
They go as far as the trees. The tree section is unbelievable. It's like 3 pages long.
Uh-huh.
But I think it, if something like that was an abstract of to give us something to actually look at on what's acceptable for a view, is it along, and some of the stuff's pretty general, and also where's that view coming from? They also define that in active use areas, primary living spaces, and then they define what that is. And I know that we're using our houses differently, and people may have an office that's got the view, but it's primarily a bedroom. But I mean, we're all living on top of each other, and we need to give everybody the opportunity to have a view as well as the neighbor. And if they're at some point, we've got to define what part of the house is super important.
Yeah, that's another project in itself.
Yeah.
And that was a topic that the council recently discussed, I think maybe 2 years ago, and landed on that it is very case by case, and it's hard to quantify the views and the privacy, more specifically the views.
Let me turn to Dr. Bob.
Yeah, I think overall, the subjective findings have actually served us pretty well. And I think there's some nice ideas to fine tune it. I know we do try to define a view as a view of distant hillsides, view of Mount Tam, or the bay, when we talk about significant views and from, the primary rooms in the house. I have heard that the state is going to pass some regulation that will eliminate this reference to views from housing elements. I think it's Dave Johnson.
Really?
I don't personally know that, but I have been told by someone that seems to know these.
Yeah, we miss Phyllis now. So she would know, and you guys haven't heard anything like this. Okay. So Dave says he thinks it's coming down the pike.
Yeah.
All right.
You don't know the bill number by any chance, do you? Okay.
Let's call Dave.
Yeah. In Germany, I think.
Let's use our lifeline. Daniel, what are you thinking about these findings?
Well, I defer to a lot to the other commissioners who've been here longer and have been through the design review and had to refer back to these. But I thought the suggestions that had been made sound good to me. I mean, I do think 6 could benefit with the change in wording from Corte Madera's code. And I think looking at the separation of the grading and landscape could also make sense. And to the extent that, any of the things could be described more specifically or in a way that makes it easier for us to come to decisions. the nature of this is to be fairly general. I mean, you can't, the code itself is for all the specifics. So, but I think a review of it by staff, given these comments and particularly just, tightening up the wording would be good.
Okay. You guys have been writing furiously. Anything else you want to ask us about? I think there's a lot to chew on here. So if you needed anything to do in your off hours, you got it. Annex Christmas Tree Hill.
So you have the 9 findings we just talked about, and projects on Christmas Tree Hill have another 11 design review findings. These were created at the same time as the overlay in 1994 through activism from residents on the Hill and through adoption of their community plan. And we've been working with these for a while and found that they can be very similar to some of our existing design review findings and even similar to one another or overlapping. And I know this is probably hard to read. And if you refer to it's attachment 8.
That's it.
Last attachment. It'll be a little bit bigger text.
Attachment 2, yeah.
Attachment
Attachment
2 is Christmas Tree Hill findings.
And attachment 8 is Christmas Tree Hill findings next to regular design review findings.
And what we're doing with this chart is we're identifying on the left, what is the Christmas Tree Hill finding that has a partner somewhere else in a finding? And on the right is what is that partnering finding? The finding that's similar or overlaps the existing Christmas Tree Hill finding. And the first one is that the proposed development protects the natural and existing landforms and vegetation of the hillside. Ridgetop development is precluded, and the location of the proposed structure is makes sense in sort of that context. It's not on the ridge. And you can't see what's on the right. It says, and that we feel is we're already making that finding with the regular design review finding number 2. That says that the project won't unnecessarily remove trees and natural vegetation, will preserve landforms and avoid development within 50 vertical feet of ridge lines, doesn't include excessive grading and would not otherwise adversely affect the natural beauty of the town. That potentially what we're saying is that maybe finding number 1 is already being made with design, because you're making both sets of findings for a project on Christmas Tree Hill. And when you read what you've written for that finding, it ends up being very similar analysis. And maybe finding 1 is could go away.
I was just going to say, if we want to back up and talk about, or did we talk about the difference in the thresholds between Christmas Tree Hill and the rest of the town?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And we
did that last meeting.
did that last week. Okay.
Yeah.
And okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Reach a conclusion.
And what we want to do with this is just talk about the ones we feel are repetitive,
Mhm.
Potentially repetitive. And we would, if you agree or think you agree, we would go away and rework Christmas Tree Hill findings to combine some of them together into one finding that are similar to one another. Or if they're already being made with regular design review findings, we would eliminate it. And maybe we would reduce Christmas Tree Hill findings from 11 to 6 or 7 or 8 instead of 11. And that's what this slide is trying to show, that Christmas Tree Hill finding number 2 talks about grading. And and that's could be combined with finding 5, which talks about graded slopes are planted or otherwise protected from erosion, including benching or terracing. And those really are talking about similar features of a project. Could be 2 and 5 of Christmas Tree Hill could be combined into one finding. Another Christmas Tree Hill finding that overlaps another Christmas Tree Hill finding is number 3 and number 7. They're very similar. As you can see on the screen, I'll let you. Christmas Tree Hill finding 8 talks about the project doesn't adversely affect health, safety, and welfare of persons in the area or endanger property located in the area. It's, we think, covered in the regular design review finding number 3. And lastly, impacts on neighboring residences are minimized. That's what we're talking about with the regular design review finding 3. The project doesn't significantly or adversely affect views, sunlight, or privacy of any residents. They're
Well, no, I mean, like I said earlier, I think, you know, if we kind of went through our regular findings and kind of fine tuned them, that they cover most of this.
Yeah.
And Christmas Tree Hill, and there might be 1 or 2 specific things that might be like the subsection I was talking about. And if you're in Christmas Tree Hill, look at subsection 2 or, you know, finding of, 10 or 11. And quite frankly, I think most of this stuff is actually addressed here, except for the driveways. Where we talk about landforms and on a general basis in our regular findings and ridge lines, and I think maybe if we beefed up the grading again, like I talk about grading and drainage on the regular, it might address some of the stuff that's happening here.
Uh-huh.
Like,
The setback one, I believe is already covered in the code, correct? Yard setbacks, number 6. Isn't that more of a code thing where you guys are determining that the setbacks, it's only the front yard setback, I believe.
we would propose to leave that in as a finding. Just because on Christmas Tree Hill, there's we call it a flexible front yard setback, where through the design review process, that front yard setback can be adjusted to 0.
That makes sense.
Still properties that maybe they drop right off the street. How do you access it without allowing? So rather than a whole bunch of variances up there, the town and through the process of creating these findings and creating Christmas Tree Hill code, made that ability to apply a flexible front yard setback to reduce it or leave it as is with the underlying zoning. So if it's being reduced, you'd want to make that that Christmas Tree Hill finding.
I have Peter. I think we align them and then we add 1 or 2 that are specific.
Yeah. So it becomes a matter of streamlining it and making it more amenable to all parties wherever they are. You guys have proven yourselves adept at doing that. I think we would all support that. If that were the case, that you found you could do it. Bob?
My understanding, what you're saying is that we're going to fine tune our regular findings, incorporate some of the language from Christmas Tree Hill, and then eliminate the Christmas Tree Hill completely.
No, I think we would study our design review findings and fine tune those in accordance with your comments previously. With Christmas Tree Hill, we would still have Christmas Tree Hill findings, but we would make sure that they don't repeat one another and they don't repeat the design review findings that we have to make also. So on a project on Christmas Tree Hill, you're making 8 findings for design review that you're all used to, and you make an additional 11 for Christmas Tree Hill. And of those 11, a lot of them are covered already. And that's what we're saying. So we'd have it, like Jim is saying, you'd have design review findings required for projects, residential projects, commercial projects. And then if you're on Christmas Tree Hill, you have these additional set of findings that are based on our existing Christmas Tree Hill findings, but they're condensed.
There's only 6 of them instead of 11.
Yeah.
Or 5. yeah, just,
Well, I'm in favor of trying to simplify it. There used to be Christmas Tree Hill organization that would oversee these and would give input
right.
on projects up there, but that really has faded and has not been in existence. So my thought is probably a lot of the current residents of Christmas Tree Hill would be, happy with one set of guidelines or certainly simplifying it to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah, and that's why I asked, and my memory doesn't serve me, that we clarified the thresholds because I don't think we're proposing, like we should wipe out the Christmas Tree Hill, community plan and guidelines, because that's a special place. And if we wanted to do that, that's a whole another process we want to go through. But I don't think we want to go there, but we do want to simplify the Christmas Tree Hill findings so they're not repetitive, as Tracy said, to each other, to themselves, as well as to the findings of the rest of the town.
Well, I would say to either do that, simplify the Christmas Tree Hill, or incorporate them into our findings to the extent necessary, and then ask for comment from Christmas Tree Hill dwellers.
Mhm.
They don't have a formal Hill Dwellers Association that's still in existence at this point. Michael Harlock would, probably maybe have some comments, but he may be, fine with what you come up with.
Mhm.
Yeah, we definitely would want to reach out to the hill dwellers and get their input on changes in that district.
You can try the famous next door thing.
Famous next door.
Yeah, it's a unusual place, and I don't know what's happening, but you guys you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on up there. We don't see what's happening up there because nothing's been before us for a while up there on the hill. But that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of stuff going on up there. So you're the ones who have to put up with this dichotomy of findings that you have to sort out or take people through two sets of them. So,
Right.
it's hard
Yeah, I would
for-
say that the most current projects are the one that Martha did on Summit. And then the one I did on 317 Redwood, which is right. So Martha's was on the very top and mine was at the very bottom. Pretty much brand new houses in both cases. But outside of that, yeah, there hasn't been any. I don't think there's been any significant, Christmas Tree Hill issues in terms of coming before the planning commission. The most pertinent issue lately was the undergrounding of utilities, which was back in the day, and that's a whole.
Bill, has anybody said anything about that redwood tree that now that it's been removed?
No,
Like it was never there? People
there's a, no.
definitely a lot more light in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So
So I think.
simple answer is yes.
It's
got to be condensed and the repetitiveness eliminated. And then you can add enough language to some of these to cover more than the issues that are there. As long as it's not repetitive of another finding. So I don't think any of us are proposing changing the language itself for these things, for these findings.
At Christmas Tree Hill.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who doesn't think it's necessary. I think they can just be incorporated and eliminate the whole separate Christmas Tree Hill section.
Okay. Daniel, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would be in favor of consolidating as much as possible. If it was possible, I think to actually reword the findings that actually cover everything, I'd actually see that as preferable. But if you didn't think you could do that, then a small separate section, might be workable. But I think the question would be what in those Christmas Tree Hill findings is so unique to Christmas Tree Hill that it wouldn't apply anywhere else.
That's exactly it.
despite the fact that we don't have public present except for one resident online, I'm going to suggest that we take a little 10-minute break here. So we can get up and walk around and take a bathroom break.
Good idea.
All right.
I'll approve that.
Recording stopped.
Remember when Fry's grocery store was there?
Yeah, right.
They used to give free cookies to all the
That can't be
kids.
on. It always seemed to be really busy. I mean, it always seemed like.
So
people were in
too.
here all the time, you know.
And I have such a stack of coupons too. I know, I have like a stack.
Can't save them anymore.
All right, we're going to continue on.
Recording in progress.
Thanks for joining us back. So we've gotten to where we've put Christmas Tree Hill in the rearview mirror.
Right.
And you want to talk about modifications to correct errors and omissions or omissions?
So where is that?
Page 17.
All right.
Were we gonna review the guidelines?
Design review guidelines?
Yeah. The only reason I bring that up because of the one comment I had is that number one has come up a lot. Where we encourage single story.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's the case anymore. I mean, I think that
Oh, that's a good point.
it's come up a lot when we've had
That's not a
two-story
general plan,
additions and
isn't it?
people said, well, your design guidelines say that we encourage single story.
Right.
Yeah, it's,
You're talking the design guidelines in the general plan, Jim?
Well, I don't know, 18, 30, 030.
In the zone.
and
I believe it could be in the
Yeah,
Yeah, I think they're
general
both.
plan
That's right.
too.
I think it is.
yeah, it is in the general plan.
Number one.
Yeah.
That's a big sticky thorn.
I mean,
Right.
should we encourage either or nothing and just like let it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You know, Tracy and I did not review and consider modifications to the guidelines. We can certainly talk about them right now. We could do a little bit of homework and reflect on them and bring it back to you, whatever your wishes. But certainly, yeah, that first one is.
Well, this is one that has plagued a lot of projects. So, and maybe we can talk about it for just a minute and then
Sure.
come back. So Bob, you get your finger on the microphone.
Encouraged but not required.
Sure. But people, yeah. Neighbors do latch onto that and they say, you know, this is a single family neighborhood. It's always been a single family neighborhood. Go out instead of up. 24 Mohawk was very much and they point to this and they point to the general plan to support that argument, which is all valid. And as Bob says, it does say encourage and not mandate.
So that's a caveat that would be added to allow for some wiggle room in the applicant's message, right? And not so rigid a response from objectors to the project. But there's 1,000 ways of saying that, like, you know, maximum ground level use of the lot is encouraged, or, you know, if you guys started to dwell on percentages that would be too restrictive. You know, what's a reasonable sized backyard? What's a percentage of the lot that should remain open? What's should we
Right.
use all the buildable area? Should
Hmm.
we go down that road?
Right.
Everybody says, oh, their yard is too big, or the,
Hmm.
what are they gonna do? Play baseball back there? Or you know, who's to say how big their yard should be?
Right. And I said, it did become, I thought it was a pretty helpful exercise, at least for me, when we did 24 Mohawk. You may recall that was 2 prelims,
Mhm.
maybe 3 prelims. And Dan, you weren't with us at that point. But basically a tear down of a very small home on a big pie-shaped lot. And the owners wanted a big home. And they basically built, proposed a 2-story home with two equal sized boxes, basically top and bottom, more or less. And one way that I was able to articulate it, and other neighbors articulate it, is, hey, this is unique in that most of the 2-story homes in the neighborhood and even in town are 75% on the first level and 25% on the second level, and you're doing 50-50, making up those numbers, of course. But that was so kind of to Peter's point.
That's very helpful.
Daniel, you have a comment to make?
I found it
Oops.
very curious. I found this curious. Where is it encouraging only single family? I mean, it just seems this day and age. Maybe back when Corte Madera was first developing, that made sense. But I don't know. Is it size of the lots that? I mean, it just seems strange to me, and I don't think if you wanted to encourage, more percentage on the ground floor, but just to say that we're encouraging only single family. And today, I just don't think it makes sense. Single story.
No, it lies at the base of what is needed in town, yeah.
There's some language in number 2 that they are appropriate to the design, architecture, style, building, harmonious with the site and compatible with the existing development vicinity, which could stand alone as number 1 and just eliminate number 1 completely, meaning that it's kind of encouraged to design something that fits in with what's being developed in the neighborhood, opposed to just singling out single story is encouraged or things like that, so that people are thinking more about the impacts on their neighbors rather than, just designing a single or a double story. Because I can see that there's situations where you might want more landscaping and open space in a densely populated area rather than having everything covered and more lot coverage. And I could also see more lot coverage if there's a view concern. So anyway, I thought number 2 is such a big, wordy, meaty statement. It could be broken out into maybe even 30 different things. And I've got it highlighted 3 different, it's like 3 different comments in there. You've got, quality of material, then you've got appropriate design to the neighborhood. So I think that I would look at both of those 2 closely. And I think that they would align. I think when you're looking at the findings, you're going to start finding that they're going to start to align really closely with them and everybody's job easier.
As I recall, there's another part of, I'm not sure where it is, but it says that horizontal design is to be encouraged rather than vertical. Isn't that somewhere? So everything, what I'm saying is,
General plan.
when we start changing things, it should be consistent through all the different pieces of what people look at.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Is it?
I'm sorry, number 4.
There's another part to it too. It's somewhere else.
Okay.
Might be in the general. I can look back and stuff.
This was 94.
94, yeah.
Who were
These
these
were
people?
created.
It's time for a refresh.
This, kind of like an 80s haircut or something.
Doesn't know what it's doing. Is it a business or is it a party?
Confused. And I like number 7, new utilities shall be placed underground.
How much control do we have?
Just
over
Mystery
that?
Hill folks, and hold on to that one, yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice though?
It's partially true. I mean, you have to run. You run from the house to the pole is underground,
Mhm.
if a new house. So that's utilities,
Mhm.
new utilities.
All right, since we're in practically a private session here, number 4, the second sentence.
Number 4. Clusters of buildings. Yeah,
From Madera del Presidio.
Right out of saying, let's not do Daly City and have ticky tacky homes.
Yeah, that's what it is.
All right, you know,
Uh-huh.
I get that. We're not, I don't think we're worried about that. Something could be said to encourage.
yeah, I guess that would be good. When I didn't follow it very closely, but when Robin Drive was proposed. Adam would probably know better than all of us, did they follow that? Did they cluster buildings? Instead of spreading them out up over the whole hillside? That was that's the intent.
Right.
We don't have too many of those in Corte Madera. Large scale developments like that, relatively large for Corte Madera standard.
So how often do you guys get queried on these design guidelines?
Not very often.
Right, so. The architect just sort of says, right. How can we make these more impactful? These guidelines.
Well, to try to encourage
Yeah.
things to move along faster. I think that's what this whole exercise is about.
Uh-huh.
So everybody's clear on how to design, what to design, and how we can look at them and properly have our discretion on how they should be interpreted. I guess.
I think that if someone is looking at these guidelines, at least if I was and I'm planning something, I would say, how do these coordinate or fit in with the findings that the planning commission had to make? How does one flow to the next?
Agreed.
If I
Uh-huh.
do 2, where does 2 go in the findings? Somehow there has to be some streamline or continuity, yeah.
So in looking at these guidelines and then reading the explanatory paragraph,
Mhm.
submitted in conjunction with the preliminary development plan or precise development plan,
Mhm.
seems to be thinking like a big development like Madera del Presidio. And
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was Madera del Presidio was done before this, but it could have been right at the same time. I can't exactly remember when it was done. So it seems like this is sort of for a master plan for a new residential development as opposed to something that you would necessarily apply to somebody building on a lot that might be available or just doing a major remodel.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This is designed for larger, multiple acre projects. And the other one next to Tiburon would be the most. I mean, another example would be, I brought to you we did the prelim for Sonora Way, the 3 lots on Sonora Way. Let's see, number, let's see it, or number 4. Oh, so number 3, the second part of number 3, preservation of view corridors to if you take out the word bay and say hillsides, preservation of view corridors to the hillside should be attained whenever possible by clustering development or by combining side yards on one side of a building. So put 2 houses real close to each other, and then you've got more space on the other ends. I think is what they're
That
trying
would be
to
an
say.
anathema now.
Pardon me?
It would be an anathema now.
Mhm.
To jam 2 buildings together rather than space them out and make a view corridor.
Right.
So I
So
like the
I
idea
think-
of connecting this to the findings. Right. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I agree with Commissioner Bundy that in reading that first paragraph, these is designed for larger. And Commissioner Rizzer brought this up initially, do we want to examine these and look at them more closely on for individual homes like you normally see? So do we want to apply number 1, encourage single-story design or a remodel of an existing home, or do we want to apply that to somebody's developing 10 acres, larger project?
The only place that's going to happen is Simon Ranch, right? That's it. That's all that's left.
Yeah, never know. Movie theater, Macy's.
Yeah.
Well, those will all be much, much denser than single family homes.
Yeah, Daniel.
This is another case where it might be helpful to look at a few other nearby towns for their guidelines, which maybe have been updated much more recently than when these were drafted.
Mhm.
And rather than necessarily trying to redraw and recreate the wheel, there could be some good things out there to draw from.
Sure. Mhm.
It would be interesting if we could look back to some of the language in 1994 when this was being drafted of, what their intent was. Was it really just large new projects or,
Mhm.
what was being thought of?
Or we need it?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, we have the findings.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the guidelines would traipse directly to the findings. So if somebody said, what are my guidelines? I think it's important to have something that means something and leads to the finding. Yeah. You could always point to, you guys could hand them the guidelines and say, here, go to work, right? But now, most architects just come in and say, what findings do I have to meet, or how does that work?
Yeah,
Right. Most architects or applicants come in and say, I want to do this project. What do I need to do to have this processed by the town? And we say, you pay a fee, you fill out your application, and the planning commission and or staff needs to make these findings. they're able to make all the findings, you're approved. If they can't make one of them, you're not approved.
So it leaps right to the findings.
Mhm. Yeah, the guidelines are not discussed or
Yeah, I don't think, I've never had a conversation with someone about the guidelines, or no one's ever asked questions about the guidelines.
Well, I mean, I've seen, packets of guidelines. I don't know if Larkspur used to have one or Tiburon when I did a project there, and it, it was like this is how things are looked at and encouraged, but it was a pretty hefty packet.
Mhm.
You say, Daniel, in some of these communities that, it's not a list of 8 things. It was, hey, this is, how we want roof lines to look when we're looking at the hillside. And this is how, we want entries to look. We don't want the entries to be this flat, So there's all these like encouragement incentives. Weren't telling you what to do, but they were saying, these are the type of things that we like in our neighborhood. And that really helps a lot, because we're not telling them to do a modern building or a traditional building or a farmhouse. We're just telling them that, this is how we'd like see our massing, and these are the things that are encouraged and why, based on the findings.
It's almost like design guidelines. So
Yeah, sort of like design guidelines. I think that would help out a lot. I mean, that would help me out a lot if I came here and I was going to develop a new house and wanted to push it through in a few years.
5 years.
Well, the methodology here is that you have a chair that you sit the architect down in there, and you have a laminated wall chart up, and you have a long stick. And you guys point to the guidelines on the wall and say, now listen. Right? Go down. And then say, repeat.
Jeez.
Slap them on the knuckles when they don't get it. Right. Anyway, that's enough of that, eh?
Okay, I think we can.
Yeah.
Unless someone has something to say.
Thank you,
Corrections.
Jim.
I would just.
You need to open up a can of worms.
Yeah, I got to commend Commissioner and Architect Rizzo for enlightening us to those design guidelines. Sorry, the first planning commissioner and the first architect point this out.
Not in your work plan.
All right, so these are some corrections, some typos, some errors that we have found and that we propose to eliminate or correct. Make life easier for everybody.
The first one is that when we adopted lot coverage changes in 2017, the maximum lot coverage is also covered in a table in a separate area from all of the amendments that we adopted. And it was just erroneously, now that table lists the incorrect maximum lot coverage with the typo. And we're proposing to fix that. We just missed updating that section. Things are repeated in the code. I just didn't realize it at the time. The second and third errors show those 2 graphics on the screen. And they're supposed to show when additions trigger design review, and they're supposed to show the application of the increased side yard setback. They're mixed up in the code, first of all. And second of all, they cause confusion. That picture on the left is not the only scenario in which something needs design review. The picture on the right of increased side yard setback doesn't show how you would increase the side yard setback if you had a new home. The whole thing is setback. So they cause confusion for applicants. And we're proposing to take them both out and to use just the plain language of the code to inform on when you need design review and when you or how you increase side yard setback for taller structures. And lastly, our code accidentally, I think it was in 2009, we adopted some changes to the zoning ordinance and accidentally deleted variance findings The section is there, but it repeats when a variance approval has lapsed. So lapse of variance approval is in twice, needs to not be in there twice, and we need to add variance findings back into the code. Obviously, we've still been making them, but they're not there. That's it.
Jim,
You found all that stuff?
Yeah, I know.
We keep track of this stuff over the years. And just given the amount of changes we're talking about, it's good to fix these things.
and more
For sure.
impressively, Tracy keeps track of these things in her head.
I do.
Martha and I write them down and we
They
kind
are written
of,
down.
but Tracy knows right here. So that's,
Even before us, Doug was starting to tally these things.
I was just gonna ask, how do you sleep at night?
A lot of info.
I get very bored and fall asleep.
I've got a question about the side yard slope while we're talking about it, because I had a project that we had to analyze the slope. And I was wondering why it almost needs to be either defined more or it seemed like it was probably put in place for if you were an uphill neighbor looking down at a downhill neighbor and you wanted to go up even further, that you would be set back. But we also made, I remember up on, we made a lower sloped house, the one on Summit do the same thing. And I was just like, well, why would they be set back? They're kind of being looked down on. Like, maybe it's defined as like the uphill slope person needs to set it back. Like, it doesn't really make sense to me why you would set back. And it doesn't define where the slope's coming from either. Right? So you could just have a slope lot this way and your neighbor's slope like this way, and you're still both 30 feet.
right.
And then you're telling this neighbor, oh, not, these guys are grandfathered in, but you've got to set your building, make it smaller. So I don't know what the intention of the code's for. It seems like it's kind of general.
You're probably correct that it was to kind of mitigate impacts when houses was at a higher slope and looking down or up at structures. But the way the code section is written, it's a little unclear and ambiguous, and essentially says you need to increase the side yard setback whenever there's a slope that's 10% or more at the perimeter of the structure. So it doesn't provide clarification on, if it's only certain instances where it should be applied. And this is a code section we've all struggled with.
I would definitely like you guys to take a look at it, because I mean, even if it was a single story structure, I mean, really doesn't really impact anybody. I could see once it gets to a second floor or over above 15 feet, then maybe we talk about some sort of additional setback on the upper level. So you could do a single story up to the setbacks, and then you could set back the upper level in a case where you're on the uphill side. But it wouldn't seem to me that you were impacting your neighbor if you're on the same slope in a downslope scenario.
Yeah, I think it's designed for side slope situations. Like Peterson, if everyone knows where Peter lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So, you've got houses that are down like this. And so when this person wants to add on a second, these are two single story houses
Mhm.
on a side slope. When this person wants to add on a second story, and the code wants that person's second story to be set back a little bit more, because they're looming right down like Peter's describing his neighbor is. I think that's the intent of it, but it's not written well. I think even just inputting the word, if the side slope, if the houses are on the side slope, then they shall be set back in some way.
You remember that really nice house that was designed on Chapman, Andrew, and the Fosters, yeah, and they, they dug this house like in the hill, and like, was it more impactful to go into the hill, or was it, and then we had them set back that, and the neighbor's house was like 35 feet away from the property line, and we still made and it was their house was almost a single story at at the property line, but they still had to set it back additional, I think it was 3 feet or so.
Mhm.
Anyway, I would love for you guys to look at that one. I think it's it almost caught me heartache in a project, but it actually worked out. We were right there on the 10%. It could have been quite significant.
It's definitely challenging because in Corte Madera, you have slopes aren't always like this or like this, right? So you could have an application where 2 houses are sitting on a slope like this. An increased side yard setback applies on this side yard. And then from here, this site goes downhill this way. And it much more important to apply increased side yard setback for this downslope
Yes,
person. And
exactly.
so you have all these multiple ways that a site could slope. I can see why it's confusing, and I can see why we struggle with it. And yeah, we'll have to see if we can improve upon it.
I mean, if it's probably the intention is for privacy, I would imagine. If I could go back in history. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you.
We're gonna leave the design review discussion behind. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, my God, years of work on your part. Yeah.
And I will take in all your comments and notes and come back, come back to you with a revised document.
He
And then
says,
that,
looking at her.
and then that, and then that will be,
Yes, we will.
and yes, we will, and then you will recommend approval of it or not approval of it, and we will take it to the council as a zoning amendment.
Right, and the timeline for this is before the end of the year, or?
It's a good question.
There's a lot coming up before the end of the year. Short-term rentals, housing element, SB9 permanent ordinance. So
Parklets,
and fitting us in to your schedule and the town council schedule may need to be driven by priority of the council.
we have to check with our,
Urgency of some of those expiring
Right.
ordinances like SB9.
we have to check with our interim town manager.
Not sure yet,
Who you know well.
but we could, provide an update on that at a
Okay.
future meeting when we think that's gonna be happening.
Well, the last town council meeting I was supposed to go to was canceled. So does anybody else have any commission reports?
I believe Daniel took my spot. Work with him. He's
Places, so, yeah, there were, under public comment, there were 3 groups of issues. Lighting at the Marine Country Day School that some, people felt did not meet the, standards, required by the town. There was several people who, felt that, the area where they are, that the dog leash law should be not required in their area. Let's see. And there were comments about the, I think, Christmas Tree Hill, about the town maintaining stairs and the stairs not being maintained well. That was the public comment. There was a presentation by a group that's promoting 2 different community gardens in town. They had plans. One would be for Cove Park, which is the backside of the Cove School, in a parking lot that's underutilized. And the other one is it's along the Corte Madera Larkspur Path. So it's long and skinny. And that would be like a second priority implementation. They're still working on funding and a number of other issues. So they were just sort of reporting to the council, looking for their support for these community gardens. And then our interim town manager reported the Marin County.
Microphone, I'm sorry, microphone, Dan.
Marin County grand jury has asked each town to let them know if they would support forming a joint power authority by the end of December to address affordable housing. And the town, the interim town manager has drafted a letter, I think is probably already sent, saying that we didn't think it was realistic to do that within this time frame, and that we already were in a process to address affordable housing in the community, and the council supported that. And that was it.
Was there any description of what that joint powers authorities, JPA, would actually do?
It wasn't, it seemed like everybody knew it except me, so I didn't go into that detail. But got the sense that they felt it really wasn't necessary for Corte Madera to meet our housing goals. And also they felt that it was very, the timeframe was just very unrealistic. So I think it was open-ended to the extent that we were willing to continue the dialogue, but we definitely didn't want to sign on to this December deadline.
Did staff respond to any of those public comments out of the gate?
The council was very supportive of the idea of the community gardens. The public comments, no, there were no comments made, no.
No leash law recommendations out of the council.
No, if they wanted to go there that night.
No measurements of 6 feet.
6 feet.
Well, that's very well reported, Daniel. Thank you.
I suggest you do it all the time. Really good.
You got it.
Very
You
good.
guys have to do it for a whole year.
I don't think so. I saw the schedule.
I remember that.
Does the planning department have anything they want to report?
I'll report on a couple items to expand a little bit on what Commissioner Kenny just said. The purpose of the grand jury was requesting that all Marin County cities collaborate on affordable housing, and their recommendation was to do so through the forming a joint powers association with a very quick timeline. So all of the agencies in Marin County responded to the grand jury report and responded to there are 10 findings in the report that responded to, and then also on the recommendation. So our response was very similar to the other Marin County agencies as well. And we do quite a bit of collaborating with the other agencies in Marin County on housing issues. And we will definitely continue to we'll do so in the future as well on some of the goals in our next housing element. And in regards to the next housing element, we did submit that to the state about a month ago. So we're waiting on comments from HCD. They have 90 days for their first review. And I think we're scheduled to get comments back the day before Thanksgiving. So hopefully they're not too many comments to ruin holidays. And then we are planning to have a rezoning study session with the commission in November. So more to come on that. We want to get feedback on some of our thoughts for the development standards for these different housing sites. And then, as you know, the goal to adopt is January. So it's going to be a pretty quick timeline.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Nothing else to report on, right? So we have some meeting notes to approve.
Peter,
Yeah.
I think, are we gonna have another planning is the planning meeting, the next planning meeting gonna be canceled? Or do you have anything on?
At this point, there's nothing scheduled for the October 11th meeting.
Well, we won't know. You won't Go for another week or so, you think, or?
We'll know by Friday because we have to put out the notice this Friday. And so I'm 99% sure we're not going to have it. I have one prelim that they get back to me tomorrow. It'll happen, but I doubt they will. So
Okay.
99% sure, no meeting on October 11th.
And then we're looking to switch the meeting, the November 8th meeting, since that's the election night, to November 9th, if that works for all the commissioners. So I'll reach out and send an email and check everyone's availability on that date.
Instead of Tuesday.
So far away.
Okay, so we've got commission meeting notes for August 9th, 2022. Anybody want to move to approve or make a notation?
Move to approve.
Second? Okay, Jim,
You got
vote,
it.
voice vote?
Aye.
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 Well, with that said, I think we'd be done with this meeting, right? Okay,
We'd be done.
let's adjourn.